Welcome to Be Customer Led, where we'll explore how leading experts in customer and employee experience are navigating organizations through their own journey to be customer led and the actions and behaviors employees and businesses exhibit to get there. And now, your host, Bill Staikos.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another week of Be Customer Led. I'm your host, Bill Staikos. Another special guest for you all today. Luis Angel-Lalanne is Vice President for Customer Voice in the Global Services Group at American Express. And this is like a really important conversation for us. And Luis, thank you so much for coming on the show. But before we just get to you for one sec, so many teams out there are struggling with the topics that we're going to cover today. And you guys have done an amazing job at American Express. And I know that, and I feel that as a customer. So I'm really excited to have you. Luis, thanks for coming on Be Customer Led.
No, thanks very much. I'm looking forward to it.
So we always start off each show, Luis, with asking our guests just to talk about your journey. And you've got a really interesting one because you don't have the traditional background of someone who might be in this space. And, you know, I'm curious just to even understand like how that history, that professional history of yours also kind of impacted your success, in this role at American Express too.
So I started as an engineer, coming out of grad school. I was a naval architect. So I was a yacht designer. And I did that for a few years. I really liked the engineering. I liked the aesthetic part of yacht design. It had to be beautiful at the end of the day. But I realized I wanted to be in an industry that was more dynamic, more competitive. And so I went to business school. And at business school, I learned about American Express and risk management. They came to recruit on campus. I went to the presentation, and I thought it was a really good fit of the quantitative work I really enjoyed from being an engineer and the business side and what I was enjoying about business school. So I joined risk management at American Express and spent 10 years there in multiple different disciplines for multiple different customer sets. But I knew from literally day one when I joined Amex, I was always looking or wanting to create kind of a well-rounded general management career for myself. And so I didn't envision, becoming a chief credit officer. I wanted to become more of a general manager. So after 10 years in risk, I realized it's time to go experience some of these other world-class parts of American Express. And I'd gotten to know a leader in the servicing organization and really wanted to work for her. And when an opportunity came up to go build and run their compliance monitoring program, I jumped at it. And it was surprisingly a good fit coming out of risk management because we were building the program. So they wanted an analytics background, someone who could help figure out like, what are we going to measure? How are we going to measure it? How are we going to report? So it was really building this program from scratch. And my quantitative analytics background is what got me there. In that role, though, I learned to love being part of a global team. It was my first time in servicing, first time in a global organization. And I really enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed the culture in servicing and that culture of needing to solve for the customer immediately. And so after building the compliance monitoring program and running that for a couple of years, the opportunity came to move to this role for customer experience, voice of customer, complaint reporting, which felt like a terrific transition of I get to keep the analytics that I like. And I've enjoyed the customer and wanting to get closer to the customer. And so this was a nice, easy transition. And so I've been in this role for about 6 years now.
That's awesome. And I love the risk management background. I was actually having a conversation with someone this morning about how do you get the voice of the customer into the boardroom? And we talked about sort of what are important topics to boards, right? Risk management being one of them, obviously, and being able to connect the voice of the customer into risk management topics and how do you solve for those really critical. So Luis, I want to start by first talking about how much you've seen the customer listening space change over your 6 years, whether that's technology, whether that's business focus, whatever that is. Like, I'm just curious to hear about your perspective because, part of this, this conversation is about the evolving, nature of customer listening. And I want to talk about the future a little bit about it as well, but just let's take a quick look, over the last couple of years and just kind of get your perspective on the change.
Yeah, one thing I've really enjoyed about this space is the fact that it's evolving, and we're getting created as we go. So I stepped into a role that had existed since probably 2007 is when we first started measuring customer satisfaction and putting it in the accountability of our front lines. So I moved into a role that was like well established in servicing. So I didn't need to go fight for attention. I didn't need to go prove myself and the value of what we bring. That was well known and accepted in American Express. That said, the program had been focused on expansion and covering all the different aspects of the servicing experience across 26 markets. And so when I joined, it really felt like we had an opportunity to go see how the world is evolving around us, because we were basically done with our rollout, but we had been with the same technology since the beginning. So we started our program before there were standard platforms that could create real-time dashboards. So as I came in, I learned, talking to different vendor partners who came knocking, I learned about the different capabilities that were out there. And we thought, hey, this is a great chance to go explore new technologies. And so that kind of kicked off a whole revisiting and transformation of the entire program. So we looked at new technology. We said, hey, related to that, our survey itself has been pretty consistent for years. Let's update that in terms of look and feel, in terms of the questions, and then look at our internal technology and what are we using to trigger the survey? And let's make that more dynamic and move it from a mainframe process into our big data lake. So we can be, like I said, more dynamic and respond faster. So it really moved from kind of a process, like a very mechanical process about getting it out the door well, into a much more dynamic process, really focused on listening carefully and responding to that listening. So it's been an exciting time, I think, to be in customer experience as you think through the move from kind of a fixed, rigid survey program to a more dynamic listening program. And also the focus, one of my first conferences, I saw Fred Reichelt speak, and it was about, really pulling in operational data. Like, it's not just the survey. So I think that explosion of pulling all that data around us has also helped inform what we do at American Express and how we think about the evolution of the program, with the focus, like I said, continuing to be on listening.
I love that you're bringing in sort of the operational data. I want to touch on that in just a little bit. There are customer signals everywhere, and so many organizations just use a survey, right? But that's 8 or 10 or 12 or 15% of the population of your customers that are talking to you, right? And by bringing data, by identifying other signals that are out there, you really do get a much more fulsome picture of who your customer is and what they think about your brand and the product and the service that they get every day. What is your general philosophy and approach to customer listening at American Express, if you can share it?
Yeah, so the survey continues to be our anchor point in terms of what we do with our customer feedback. And the importance of that anchor point is that that becomes metrics and goals across, from our frontline folks all the way up to the top of the servicing organization. So we've got this nice consistency of customer experience being a critical measure for everyone's success in the organization. And so that becomes kind of the core foundation of what we do with it. We, and with that consistency from top to bottom, we've also had, like I said at the beginning, that consistency over time. So it's not, no one's ever going to accuse us of it being a flavor of the month, et cetera. The other benefit to all of this is we've got, our colleagues are really experienced in it as well. So they're able to self-service and use dashboards to really understand what they're doing. We're able to focus on deeper analytics. So we've also created this experience where our teams can use the tools we've given them to understand their performance and take ownership of their performance. So it's not that they're all sitting around wondering, oh, I wonder what's going on with my performance. I wonder what's driving. Like, they can go take a look. And then my team comes in with the more advanced analytics to really get at root cause, driver analyses, things like that, to really make sure that we're focused on responding to and changing processes for the customer. And probably the third thing that's been really important to us and kind of our philosophy, and this really got driven home by the changes that we all went through in COVID, and kind of the way our customers' needs changed really quickly, more quickly than any time in recent history. It really became a more pure focus on just listening. So some of the things I started doing over the last 2 years was sending weekly files of customer verbatim. And it first started with a COVID focus, because that was what everyone was interested in. And then we just morphed that into a kind of a random file of customer listening. We'd literally take a file from a day and say, here's what we got on this day, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and send it out to get people focused on listening and how are we responding to customers, regardless of scores, regardless of how it impacts our metrics. So, I think our philosophy has been this importance of this core of the survey and listening survey and the score, and how that accountability runs top to bottom, but then expanding to also embracing just listening regardless of score.
I love that. I want to focus on your second point for a second, because self-serve, particularly with the proliferation of technology and these big platforms, that has been a much more important part of the overall, let's say, ecosystem, right? In an organization, and the ability to close the loop. You get feedback. People on the front lines are closing the loop with customers, et cetera. How do you find the balance? Like, what do you think is the right balance, and what do you have? More importantly, just what's your advice for listeners who are trying to come out of this pushing out reports?
Yeah.
And there are still really big organizations that I talk to. They're still in this mode of, I create the reporting, I send it every month, and then, and someone looks at it, right? But I love how you're bringing these tools out to the business so they can self-serve. But like, what's that right balance for you? And if you haven't found it, that's fine too. But like, what's your advice there?
So this has been a really kind of rewarding transition I've seen in my team since I moved into this role 6 years ago. When I moved into it, we did a lot of reporting, and that was a big focus, was getting the monthly reports out. But then moving to a new platform, a modern, dynamic, real-time platform, we were able to start to slowly shift that focus away from we produce reports to we produce insights. And so that's our vision with that migration has been, let's give our folks in the front lines the tools to do that level one analysis. So we've created dashboards then that have key segmentation variables available to them, customer segment, call center location, product, country, 5 or 6 or 7 different key measures. And then we went through and we put some special focus on training kind of the analytics folks that support the operations leaders. So an operations leader might have a small analytics team, a center head, the woman who runs the center head in Mexico, she'll have a few analytics people. So we focused on them, making sure that they understood how to use the dashboards we created, creating custom dashboards for them if needed, so they can create the views that their leaders wanted. That really allowed us to move away from reporting. So now we do very, very, very little reporting. I mean, we still probably have a handful that we send out, but most of it really is now focused on deeper analytics and insights and things you can't answer, I should say, with that level one dashboarding, filtering, et cetera. And so I really feel good about that. And it makes also the job more rewarding for my team. They're not producing reports anymore. They're doing insights. They're doing more complex, more impactful analyses, which is definitely more exciting for us.
And that must, obviously, or maybe it did, I don't know, but the skill set of the team must change and evolve as well as part of that, right? You don't need sort of people developing reports. With that skill set, it's, to your point, it's a much different sort of analytical capability and toolkit that folks need to bring to the team. That's always a scary transition for a lot of teams, right? When they're going to that kind of thing. So kudos to you and the team for having the courage to do that, and the foresight to do that, because I think that's largely what a lot of this work is going. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about as well is when you think about that, not just the stuff that you're pushing out to the business through these dashboards, but even the work that you're doing as a team. How do you focus on actionability, right? That actionability is always like the big thing. I being in the role myself for many years, it was, you get some stuff and sometimes customers like, how would you rate this site? 10. Why did you rate it that way? I liked it. Okay. That's not really actionable feedback. So like, how do you think about actionability and maybe in the analysis that you and the team are doing and delivering back to the business?
Yeah, I think it's still one of the fundamental challenges of those of us in this role. And I talk to my team about, sometimes I feel like we have a curse, and our curse is everything we share is interesting. You'll go with an analysis, you'll take it to a partner and say, oh, here's what we found about the part of the business you run. Here's the opportunities, here's what's working well. And everyone will love it. You'll walk out of that meeting and you'll think, wow, we really nailed it. No one gave us remotely bad feedback. They were all engaged, they asked questions. And then you check in a few weeks later and say, what have you done with it? And they'll say nothing. So that's our curse. Like, you don't get that feedback instantly. It says like, no, this really missed the mark. Like, no, every time we go, we're bringing interesting information. So we definitely recognize that the gold standard is a partner who's going to take your information and go change their business practice because of it. And that's what we're aiming for. So some of the ways we deal with that are, the first thing we'll do is we'll partner more with our colleagues who have demonstrated a willingness and a desire to drive change using our information. So we actually don't support every operations leader exactly the same way. Some of them just want reporting, and they'll get the reporting, and then they've got the filtering so they can use that to manage their people.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our partners have maybe more of a mandate to drive change. And so we'll give them a little bit more support. And so that was something that it took us a little while to realize that it's okay to not give everyone the same support, because they don't all need the same thing from us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it fits pretty well for the folks who are doing a great job. They just need to understand and tweak on the margins. Great. Dashboards are going to do that. For folks who really are motivated to or need to drive change, that's when they're going to get more attention from us. So that's one of the ways we've managed to focus on driving impact is the recognition that we don't have to give everyone the same exact level of support. And then the other is a real focus on my team at having that seat at the table. Mm-hmm. Or we pulled in when our business partners have a question, which is nice, or do we always have a seat at the table? So we're actively listening for what are they talking about, and we can make connections for them and recommend things. And again, that's another one that's really hard to achieve. It takes a lot of time. And we don't try with everyone, but with our partners who need to drive change, we do aspire to get a seat at the table, to be part of their extended leadership team. So we're there on the weekly updates and the weekly meetings. So those are a couple things we do. They're not necessarily easy to do. They're not always consistent, but that's the way we try to think of that focus on driving impact and not just, producing reports that everyone thinks are interesting and then does nothing with.
Boy, I've been in one of those, or one or two of those situations before in my career. Never an easy time for the team. Luis, I want to talk to you about journey analytics and journey orchestration. It's kind of like all the rage these days, and everyone's kind of, right? It's the silver bullet for CX and et cetera. How are you thinking about the impact of these type of capabilities for American Express? What impact do you actually see, perhaps even these new technologies bringing to an organization like yours?
Yeah, so I feel like we're where a lot of companies are in terms of expanding our view of journey. And the way I think about it is, our survey historically has been a transactional survey. So you call up American Express, the next morning you're going to have an email in your inbox asking about that. And what we've done over the years is, starting with that kind of that very discrete interaction, is start to expand our kind of horizon around that. So start to go a little bit further around the journey, around the start, what happened before that interaction, what happened after. And then look at a ring that goes even wider, then look at a ring that goes even wider. So I think we're evolving from transaction out to journey, almost like, ring by ring, further and further out. And so that's the way we've been thinking about it. So it's allowed us to use a lot of our internal data to start to understand and make the connections of what journey is a customer on. And I think we're trying now to explore different technologies, just like a lot of other companies, to understand how can we bring in that journey orchestration? How do we understand when a customer might be stuck at a certain point of a journey? So I don't know if we've cracked the code on that yet, but I feel good about this evolution that we've been on for a few years, of starting with that kernel of the transaction and thinking more and more broadly about the journey as time goes on. And then also understanding that not everything we do is a journey. Sometimes it's a one phone call journey. Some customer calls with a question, we answer the question, great. So in that case, our transaction survey is spot on. But then others, like dispute, if you call to dispute a charge, that could be done on the phone, but it could take weeks of back and forth with merchants and getting more information. And that's a survey that we've recently revised to better capture what happens at the beginning of that experience and at the end. And so that's one that we have put more attention into recently. So we're still evolving. And it really starts, like I said, with that kernel of the transaction and then expanding out to take a broader and broader view.
I love that you're taking your time almost, right? At least that's what I'm hearing. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but because this, the capability is super powerful, and it can have a profound impact on your customers as well as your business. So very, very smart to kind of really think about, and I also love your point around not everything is a journey. I think that sometimes companies over-index on can over-index, I should say, on that, and try and create everything as a journey when it doesn't necessarily need to be. So, love that you said that. Can we focus on the future just for a couple minutes? And where do you see, whether that's listening or just the even broader CX, if you've been thinking about it, where do you see this space evolving over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? And maybe that's technology, maybe that's different ways of accessing the customer's voice, accessing different signals. I'm curious just to get your perspective, because and this is where I learned too as a leader in this space, and I love how people are tackling the same problem in different ways. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
What I see for the next few years is a combination of some big steps and then just a lot of continued evolution. One of the big steps we're working on right now at American Express is rolling out a modeled customer sentiment. So using the actual customer's voice from the phone call, using the transcript from the words and the tone and metadata like length of the call, crosstalk, dead air time, and modeling that against the survey responses. We've built a sentiment model. And obviously that, so many benefits of now we can scale and get a score on every single phone call. And I think that's something we're in the midst of rolling out now to our frontline to ideally replace the survey in the frontline incentive with the modeled sentiment. And this is obviously a big step for us. We've been, like I said, it's been since 2007 that we've had the survey output in our frontline incentive, and now we want to move to a modeled score. So we're going to go really slowly and carefully, as you would imagine, across thousands of care professionals. But the idea is start to sensitize them to this model, and we've been sharing it, and the feedback has been, I keep wanting to say surprisingly positive. Not that I don't believe in the model, but I was certainly concerned about the reception of kind of a black box model. But the benefit we have is it highly correlates to the survey. And when it doesn't correlate to the survey, 90% of the time, we'd rather hold people accountable for the model. Because the survey picks up things that happen outside of the phone call, or maybe your perception of the brand, which is valuable to us in process improvement, but maybe not necessarily valuable for holding a frontline person's accountable and in their incentive. So the reception has been pretty positive so far from our front lines all the way up to leadership in the front line, that this population score is going to be a more effective measure of performance for our frontline. And then I think this also becomes a tool that's going to evolve over time. We've already started looking at getting more granular within our sentiment score, looking at how does sentiment change over the course of the call, and at what points does it transition the most. So now we can give very specific feedback to say, like, right here is where the sentiment went from positive to negative or negative to positive. So I think what started as a way to get a better frontline metric is going to turn into hopefully a whole structure that allows us to do much more detailed coaching at scale. So I think that's going to be a big one. And I think around that, as technology gets better, it's going to allow us to get more granular, even with our regular insights, as we start to pull more and more data into our big data environment, as omnichannel gets better and better. I mean, I know we've been talking about omnichannel for years, but it's continuing, like the actual ability to understand where someone sits in a journey and have all the data connect and talk to each other, that continues to get better every year. So I think our ability to do journey analytics is going to get better through our own experience and just through the data and technology around us getting better. So I see reliance on the survey continuing. I don't see it going to zero, but I do see us getting to a point in the future where we're going to be smarter about when do we survey, why do we need to survey, because we're going to have tools like sentiment and much better omni-channel data to really understand the experience the customer had. So I think, like I said, I think survey sticks around. I think it's going to be important for us, but smaller volumes of survey, less of a burden on customers. But, the continued focus on that customer voice, which I'm excited about.
So there's a lot of just sort of clickbait articles out there, right? Like the death of the survey and, the survey, is going away and the whole thing. I agree. Where do you maybe see, I'm just curious just to hear your thoughts. Where do you kind of see it maybe sticking around or having a place in all this?
I still like the idea of journey surveys, of really asking the customer, at the end of this experience, what did you walk away with? How do you feel? Did you feel the overall experience went well, didn't go well? Eventually, we're going to get to a point where we can model that pretty closely when we understand what are the peak emotions and where's someone's emotion at the end of the journey. I just think with processes continually evolving, products continually evolving, I think we'll be able to model transactions better than we'll be able to model journeys. So I think journey surveys are going to continue, and I still want to find a way to get that customer voice and that feedback of how did this experience land on them and what do they have to tell us? I think we might be able to model a score, but we're not going to be able to model feedback. So I'm still looking forward to a future of journey surveys. Again, hopefully not as many as we need today, but still having them, and product experience, overall product NPS relationship surveys as well. because we might be able to model, like I said, the score, but I don't think I think we're pretty far away from being able to model the feedback that we'll
For
actually
sure.
get from customers.
For sure. Really interesting. Luis, I've got two more questions for you. They're not related to your work or the work that we do from a broader customer perspective. Who are the leaders you admire in this space most, and why?
So I love this question. And part of it is because I still find such joy in the CX community. You know, in my previous role, like I mentioned, was compliance monitoring. Yeah. There was no external community from that. Occasionally, we'd have a consultant come in and I'd sit down with them and talk about what my program was doing. At the end of it, I'd always walk away thinking, I think they learned more than I did through that. But in the CX space, I love the community. I love the interactions with peers, with experts, because the nice thing about what we're doing in this space is we're competing on customer experience, but we're not competing on customer experience programs, you know, like, so it makes it a safe place to share and you know, talk to competitors and peers. So I really enjoy that piece of it. So it's kind of a long preamble, but it's definitely something I wanted to say because I think it's really rewarding to be in this space. But in terms of like individuals, I think of like the researchers. They're always the ones who inspire me. You know, they're bringing us first principles to really understand what's going on around us. They're giving us tools to help solve our problems. You know, I think of like Maxi Schmidt-Schubermanian at Forrester. You know, she's one of the people. My favorite thing to say about Maxi is you walk away from every conversation with her smarter. And you know, it's really hard to say about a lot of people.
That's right.
You know, so I think she's just fantastic. Always makes me better. And then I think of advisors I've had. So Adele Sage, Budovsky, Nancy Vega. You know, these are folks who have been there for me, you know, listening to my challenges, listen to my problems, help connect me with research, help connect me with peers. And again, help me feel kind of like fulfilled in this industry that we're in. And, you know, they've always been there for me. So I really appreciate that, like the intelligence with the, you know, the listening and like being able to connect things, which is just fantastic. So yeah, lots of really good people in this space, and it's definitely energizing.
For sure. I actually was on LinkedIn early this morning with someone actually who's new to this space with a large pharma company, and they're like, you know, where do I go for? I'm like, no one is going to turn you down if you're looking for information in this community. You can literally ping anybody, and they'll get on the phone with you. It's really what is special. One last question for you, Luis. Where do you go for inspiration?
So I think I'll answer that two ways. One is for CX. This is going to sound generic. It's just like the experiences around us. You know, I always tell my team, let's be good consumers of all the surveys you get and all the experiences you get, and think critically about them. You know, because a lot of times you're going to have great ones, and then you know, some of my favorite things that we've rolled out at Amex are ideas we've picked up from others in other surveys in other industries that we just thought was neat, and let's try it at Amex. So I think the first one is just being a good inquisitive, you know, consumer of experiences helps create energy and excitement for me. And then the other is probably, you know, I'll take a different approach for the second part of this answer. That's just kind of music. You know, I love listening to music, and one of the positives of having been working from home so long is, you know, I can turn the music on, turn it on loud, and get my energy depending on the mood I need and what I need to get going. And so that always helps, is some classic rock or some, you know, alt rock or, you know, anything in between to help get me moving when I get a little stuck with something. So that's probably the other way I'd answer this.
I love it. So you know, we're probably the same age, kind of just looking at you. So we're probably have similar kind of bands that we listen to on a regular basis. Luis, this has been a really fun conversation. A lot of learning. Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's wonderful to have you on Be Customer Led, and you know, I'm excited. You know, as a customer and as someone who just loves the American Express brand, and I'm excited for your successes and continue to see them. So thanks for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a really fun conversation.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Great show this week. We're out. Talk to you soon,
Thanks
everyone.
for listening to Be Customer Led with Bill Staikos. We are grateful to our audience for the gift of their time. Be sure to visit us at becustomerled.com for more episodes. Leave us feedback on how we're doing, or tell us what you want to hear more about. Until next time, we're out.